Welcome to Green Cities. Our topic today is lessons learned at the World Urban Forum 11. I'm Ted Liebman. I'm going to moderate this. I'm a principal at Perkins Eastman. Since 1976, I've attended Habitat 1, 2, and 3, so I have nearly a half century of loving habitats and World Urban Forums and UN Habitat's work. My attendance at these extraordinary events has taught me to listen to all voices and to be flexible, be patient, and celebrate change.
What did you think of the
Now I'm not advancing. My focus over the past 7 years has been to implement UN Habitat's SDGs in the New Urban Agenda. With Perkins Eastman and working with several wonderful NGOs, many are here with us, addressing all the complex issues in a multicultural and quickly changing world. Our speakers today have all attended WUF 11 in Katowice, Poland, and we hope in this hour to tell you our lessons learned at WUF 11. WUF 11 itself was extraordinary. First, because it happened with COVID-19 still with us, that it happened in Katowice, Poland, with a war next door and their remarkable response to refugees from Ukraine. And yet, with COVID fears and airline cancellations, 17,000 people from 155 countries participated in this hybrid event with 10,000 attending in person. WUF 11 itself was another, for me, very rewarding experience of sharing and learning. Major themes of the side events went from urban crises and equity to a healthy future for us all. A special focus for me were the sessions on the Ukraine. First, my parents were both born in Ukraine, and I've worked on and actually built buildings in Kyiv and the Crimea. At WUF 11, I attended many of the sessions that you see there on the screen to learn more. I was greatly impressed with, and actually was moved with the social, cultural, economic, and spatial planners from Ukraine that came to this event and presented very complex issues they now face during the war, and some very serious creative thinking and strategizing about Ukraine's future. I hope to be involved with my firm, Perkins Eastman, my professional groups, the AIA and UIA, and with the several NGOs represented here and that I work with almost every day. However, I'm going to end with some overwhelming global challenges in this multicultural world. And you see some of the groups that I work with, and you can see me sitting among the SDGs, so I know how they feel. Climate change, population growth, and mass migration worldwide. I carry these three and equity as an umbrella over my head each day. So it just reminds me of all of our responsibilities and my responsibility to make this rapidly changing world better. Understanding density. Both photos are very similar and very high densities. To the left are dense high-rise communities, and we often find a lack of identity, isolation. Yet on the right, same density in many informal communities with a lack of city services, many health and legal issues. But there's often a social and economic vitality in those places. There's a sharing and a sense of community. And that's part of an SDG 11 desire. Low-rise multifamily housing and walkable communities will create better quality of life in our cities. And low-rise doesn't always mean low density. Citizen engagement. Let's listen to the needs and aspirations of all. We must encourage participation of all stakeholders and listen in our work in cities. Housing affordability, changing households. In New York City, it turns out today that only 17% of households contain two parents with a child under 25. How has our future changed? How must we respond to these changes in how households are composed? And finally, equity, equality, and inclusion. These three words might be the most difficult to achieve in our world. They occur in many sectors, from housing to education. Lots of research and some progress on inclusion for the disabled and aging, but so much more is needed. Well, here's our panel. And to the audience, please ask questions in the chat, because I hope we will have some time at the end. And let's start with Ana Rubo and go.
Okay. Oh dear, this is going backwards. This is getting an advanced preview of a slideshow. Okay, thank you, Ted, for the opportunity to speak again as somebody who attended WUF and who has attended various WUFs over the years. What I want to do this afternoon in my very brief time that I have, I just want to talk about the event that I was most involved in at WUF in Poland. And that was the awards for the UIA, Union of International Architects, and the UN Habitat competition for buildings that had observed the SDGs. This award is the first of a 5-cycle award, and so it will happen at every WUF up to 2030. And I think it's a really remarkable award. So what I want to do is just to sort of pique your interest, if you like, and to show you just a little bit of what the winning projects or commended projects were in these various categories. There were 6 categories. So let's just have a look at the first category. Okay, so here was the award, and here is the executive director, Maimouna Sharif, who we met with this morning, in fact, and the judges on the bottom. And I must say, when we talked this morning, I could only say this has been a wonderful award, and Habitat should be very pleased that they're doing this. So here we had, for this award, there were 125 entries from 40 countries in 6 categories. There were 40 plus finalists, and all were invited to make short videos. There were 5 winning projects and 15 commendations. Much of this material is online, and I would urge you to take a look. Here we have the first category, the open category, which we actually didn't make an award in, but there were many excellent projects. And I will just highlight one of those, which was the Village Lounge in Shangun. A wonderful little rehabilitation project that created a social center. The words that Ted just used about sort of cultural relevance, about cultural inclusion and so on. This was absolutely at the heart of this project. Another one was a landscape project, a water catchment project in Copenhagen. Again, a startlingly good urban design project. Now, moving to the second one, which did have a clear winner, which was the improving energy. And this was a school, a daycare center, in which they took an old building that you can see on the top, and they encircled it with a new structure. And what they did with this new structure was to have enormous gains environmentally, plus, of course, huge gains in terms of the space. Now moving along to the Housing Award, which was from Hong Kong. And this was, I think, a very innovative project. And the designers made the observation, which you can see here on the screen, that on the left, you can see what an apartment used to be in terms of size. And then that apartment became divided by 7. So people are living in very overcrowded. These young architects devised the furniture system that could actually make the space much more usable, much more friendly, and in fact, to contribute to the goal of education. Now moving to the participatory land use and inclusive planning. And this was a project from Argentina, again, well worth a look at. It's a participatory enabled housing and infrastructure upgrade. 40,000 people were affected, over 72 hectares. The participatory planning and design is absolutely remarkable. And what was so encouraging was the number of young people that came to accept these awards. Moving on to the access to green and open public space, again, a group of young architects from Asia, the Community Architecture Network. Again, people who work in a very participatory way, and this was a river ghat in Bangladesh. Here
1 minute left.
1 minute, okay. So here you have some of the participatory activity that's going on. And I think the last one is the House of Dreams in China. And so I would just rush over this because Ted has asked me if I would just say a little bit and give me an extra minute. I'm not sure that I can do it an extra minute to find it, but I'm going to go now to the website of the local project challenge. And in a way, the reason why I have been doing much of this work around this competition and so on is because of, I guess, its reputation through the local project challenge. Now, I think, Ted, I will come back to it because otherwise I'm going to take time from other people. If we can get to it later, we will do that. So I will bow out at this moment and thank you for your attention.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Anna. Jeannie, you're up next. But you're muted.
There we go. Thank you very much for including me in this wonderful conversation about WUF 11.
How could we not include you, Jeannie?
Well,
We learn each time.
That's too much. And I like Anna, I am going to focus on an event that I was involved with, which was the event on financing adaptation for climate change. When we proposed this roundtable, we thought that we would like to get as many people as possible included in this discussion because it's a multi-stakeholder event that needs to, or multi-stakeholder policies and programs that need to take place. And as we planned it, we invited many, many speakers, and it turned out that we had 16 speakers in this roundtable. I spent days talking to the organizers of WUF in the rooms, and I asked them if they could put the chairs in a big circle because we were going to have these 16 people. And they assured me every time I talked to them, not a problem, Professor Birch, they'll be in a circle. We've talked to all the people, not a problem. We arrived at the room and guess what? no circle. So we had to squish 16 people at the desk at the front. It was quite a challenge to do that. But what was exciting was the representation that we had at this and the conversation that occurred. Let me just give you the organizations from which they came so you can see how many people are involved in this kind of conversation. And then I'll tell you briefly what our conclusions were. So we had a representative from the World Economic Forum. We had Calvin Johnson from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We had a representative from the World Bank. We had a representative from OECD. We had a representative from the Rock Arch Resilience Center of the Atlantic Council. We had someone from USAID. We had someone from the CCFLA, which is the City Climate Leadership Finance Alliance. We had people from the Resilient Cities Catalyst. We had a mayor. We had somebody from the UN Capital Development Agency. We had somebody from PwC, the accounting people. We had the Secretary General of UCLG, and we had a labor union representative from public service organizations worldwide, and a representative from Meridium, the investor in mitigation and in adaptation. So these are people coming from the private sector, the public sector, from the banking community, from the point of view of the multilateral development banks, from bilateral development like USAID, from networks that are supporting those who need to think about how to do project finance and how to pay for the kinds of projects we need for adaptation. So it was a very, very lively conversation as each one answered certain questions like what they were doing in the area, what they were seeing as needs in this area, and kinds of innovations that would need to be done, and how to set about figuring out how to pay for adaptation. As you may or may not know, the funding for adaptation is minimal. It is a small fraction of what is going into mitigation for climate change. And this is particularly important for cities because cities are where much of the problem will create compounding and cascading issues. And we need to think about how to approach systematically and the systems of cities to adapt them to what we know is going to be coming towards us. I just heard last week, Aramo Revi, who's on the IPCC, who's saying, yes, we might make it to the 1.5 degree target that we have, but we're not likely. In fact, what it's probably going to be is 2.7 or 3 degrees, and we need to think about adaptation. Frightening thought. Whatever, we do need a program and a process for doing this. And so what we all concluded was, first of all, that cities need to map their needs. Very few cities have done that, and they need to do so, particularly in this adaptation. They also have to figure out what is adaptation and what is mitigation and how do they overlap, because they frequently do overlap. You might be doing a mobility system in a city, but you need to make sure that when the floods come, it won't be destroyed. What are the appropriate policy that would be adapted and paid for in adaptation? And here we need to talk about what happens at the national level, what happens at subnational level. Subnational could be state or provincial, and local being city or neighborhood. And lastly, we have to think about, well, second to lastly, we have to think about the subsidiarity issue. Who does what best? And lastly, we've got to come up with new innovation financing strategies to get that money to cities over time. And this 16 people who are representing so many groups here are hard at work at that. We'll be having more discussions of this at COP27, as well as other arenas. But WUF provided the arena for this brilliant multi-stakeholder group to get together and know what each other was doing and work together in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. You see, everyone, that just from that one round table, even though it was square, we learned a great deal. And if you then attended 50 during the week of WUF 11, you walked away with not only knowledge, but a feeling that we have a small world and a large world.
And one that's networked.
And one that's very networked. Like, I'm going to call Jane Katz to speak next. And Jane and many of the people who are speakers are people in NGOs and groups that I work with every day, and we're almost like a family. And but we're a family that feel that the global issues of today are important to solve. And many of us met with the ED, the executive director of UN Habitat this morning, and we're planning for Egypt in January of 2023 for the World Urban Forum 12. And that's exciting for all of us. So Jane, you're on.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Well, okay, this is my 10th World Urban Forum. I hope to go to the 11th one. I did miss the first one in Nairobi, but this was the first one that was held in Eastern Europe. And I'm really glad to be following Jeannie, because usually when I attend World Urban Forums, I focus on the housing sector and data and also land issues, which I tried to do in between, but you just get tied up in so many different areas. This session was, I was invited to co-lead the Civil Society Roundtable. And one of the things that I was asked to talk about was the work that we were doing with stakeholders in the United Nations disaster risk reduction realm of their advisory group. And so this time around, I was actually representing the UNDRR's Sendai stakeholder engagement mechanism, which I talked a lot about at the Civil Society Roundtable. And we also dealt with a lot of the climate issues at the World Urban Campaign, which is another network that my co-lead the Civil Society group for that group. And we just finished a major effort called The City We Need Now, which also has an element of economic stability and resilience, et cetera. But one of the things that, as representing the stakeholder group for Sendai, I submitted a session called Operationalizing an All-of-Society Approach to Reduce Disaster Risk and Build Resilience. I know it's a mouthful, but it really aligns with a lot of the work that Jeannie was doing and talking about in the finance area of resilience and climate. And this really was to set up a dialogue with the different stakeholder groups. And we didn't have as many stakeholders as Jeannie did, but we did try to engage most of the stakeholder groups that we could latch onto. The problem was that we did have some COVID issues and several other issues, but we did manage to have a really great session. The networking event really aligned with the dialogue theme of building urban resilience. And we wanted to provide an open platform for sharing experiences and best practices through multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional, multi-stakeholder engagement and collaboration with challenges of disaster risk and the need to build resilience, to save lives and to build hope. As such, we have the stakeholder engagement mechanism of UNDRR, which is made up of about 16 stakeholder groups, partner groups, and also represents the different global goals, which Sendai is one, climate change is another, New Urban Agenda is one that I represent. And what they called for in the Sendai framework, which was one of the global agreements and global frameworks, similar to the New Urban Agenda, but focusing on disaster risk and also to loss and damage, was to have an all-of-society approach that was in support of effective disaster risk at all levels. So my session, which took place in the 2-hour span, hour and a half span, brought together representatives from a number of different sectors. We had a grassroots woman from Kenya. We had the private sector represented. We had the constituency of disabilities group. We did have somebody from the US State Department. We also included local government from ICLE and a regional government representative as well. So we tried to have all levels represented as well. So what the speakers did was to talk a lot about their shared experiences with partnership models in a variety of contexts. And Some of those areas that were highlighted were inclusive planning and disaster preparedness. They discussed specifically COVID and health-related issues, in particular, the lack of or misinformation about vaccines in local communities. They talked about assertive technology, soft and nature-based solutions, especially for sea level rise, inclusive housing. There was one woman, the Kenya woman, who talked about mapping and identifying land for secure tenure, especially for rebuilding housing in a disaster. Long-term integrated planning and peer-to-peer learning and citizen engagement. Some of the recommendations, and my brief time left, that and actions going forward was the continued need to support stakeholder engagement and an all society approach. The need to increase capacity of governments to address systemic risk and support change. Long-term and integrated planning, bringing everyone to the table. The need to empower citizens, as well as looking to the communities to upgrade their communities and prioritize the community needs. Improving communications during crises, supporting cities in their implementation of citywide action plans, integrating climate change adaptation and mitigation considerations, increasing resources at all levels of government, and of course, to get a better understanding of funding streams, eligibility, and access to that funding. So as we move ahead with these recommendations, we'll be hoping to create more resilient communities and other actions, and we'll be discussing this further, as Jeannie said, probably at a number of the different meetings that we have. The Global Urban Development will be hosting an Urban Thinkers Campus in November and in New York City. And so what we're hoping to do also is to have something called a learning lab that will focus in on resilience and climate change. Thank you, as well as housing.
Thank you, Jane. And we're going to move right to Kathy Klein. Kathy, you're on. You're muted. You're muted, Kathy. Okay.
I'm unmuting myself. I'm just trying to get the screen.
You've done it.
I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is the first time I have been able to do this. So let's see. So this just is a picture of me and what I have done and where I am. I'm a volunteer. And first, I'd like to thank you, Ted, for inviting me to share some of my experiences at the recent World Urban Forum that took place, as we know, in Katowice, Poland, the end of June. This was my third World Forum, not 10th like Jane's, but third. And I'm representing the growing older populations living increasingly in urban areas, many in unplanned informal settlements. And as co-chair of the General Assembly of Partners Older Persons Partner Constituency Group, or what we call GAP, working closely with UN Habitat and host country representatives, I have now coordinated facilitation of the past 3 World Forum, Urban Forum roundtables. These are organized roundtables around different constituency groups, using our voices to be able to convey some of the issues we would like people to address. It does, however, never cease to amaze me. This is the picture. I wanted you to get a sense of what the actual site looked like. This was the convention center where most of the events took place. It never ceases to amaze me that while the demographic shift from youth to older persons globally has been acknowledged widely, we're very underrepresented and quite invisible unless given opportunities like the forum and the upcoming October United Cities and Local Government World Congress, which will take place next month in Daejeon, Korea. Recently, in fact, the World Bank Group published Silver Hues, Building Age-Friendly Cities, which includes many of the points we've been trying for a number of years to present. This is the inside space of this large convention. And our roundtable here, you see in the center, you see, if you can see my cursor, that's Lance Brown, president. Well, why is it going back? President of CSU. In the middle is the representative from the World Health Organization that's responsible for age-friendly cities and the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. And to her left is my co-chair, Michael, from Kenya. We had at our roundtable, like everyone else, representatives of the local host country of Poland. In this case, the Secretary of State for the Ministry of Family and Social Policy, who welcomed everyone and described what his ministry offers for older persons. He was followed by a description of the courses available for older residents in Poland, in Katowice, through what they call the University of the Third Age. It's not the only one that exists worldwide, but the one that they created there locally in Katowice. And finally, a third Polish woman described what Ted was talking about, the volunteer efforts to help older Ukrainian refugees, because again, the focus tends to be on women and children who are able to leave, but there are also older Ukrainian refugees who left and don't speak the language, have maybe no family connections, and very little opportunities other than through these volunteers. You saw the picture, as I said, of one of the World Health Organization staff, and we also had the person who is responsible for the Age-Friendly Cities Network. This is something that started in 2007 and now has over 1,100 accredited member cities and communities. He also spoke about the value of the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. We heard from activists working to improve the lives of older residents, this in Taiwan. And here is my colleague, Dr. Victor Pineda, founder and CEO of World Enabled, who represents persons with disabilities. And catch that, I've learned we're not talking about disabled people, but persons with disabilities. The same way I really strongly hope we can talk about older persons, not the elderly, because that for many people represents us frail people who seem to be in need of largesse of states rather than rights holders who have our own place and should advocate for that.
1 minute.
We talked about the funding source in the UK that provides resources for older persons and requires that the design of innovative products must engage older persons from the start so that the products actually reflect what older people want. The picture on the screen now is my colleague Rio Hada, who's recently returned from Geneva to New York, who talked about the absolute need for a binding legal treaty on the rights of older persons. This is the group I was with, wonderful group of UN Habitat people, as a collaboration, which we've all talked about, that's necessary. Finally, as a former diplomat, longtime activist with a doctorate in organization, I have found the dream volunteer job retirement, working every day to make the lives of us older persons globally better, reflecting what we know we want, what solutions exist, and how to fix the many gaps that are there. So there I am at the World Urban Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And Kathy, I mean, someday when AARP invites you when you turn 50, I hope you will join. And
well, thank you. I represented them for a decade, helped represent them at the UN. So thank you very much.
Okay. And our next speaker is going to be my president, not Biden, but of CSU, Lance Brown. Go, Lance.
You're on speaker.
Thank you, Ted. And I'm
I'm just looking at the screen and all the names of the people who are in attendance. It's so wonderful to see so many good friends and colleagues. I think I know almost everyone here today. So it's quite a big family. If Nick shares my screen, you will see that what Ted said is true. We partner nicely in events like this. I think I've been to about 6 WUFs, but the last 3 with Ted, and we've done a lot of programs together and done them quite successfully. Kathy, thank you so much for the on-site images of what Katowice looked like. I realized that while we were debriefing, a lot of people weren't there, and it was good for them to see the venue that we were in. Nick, if you could advance that slide. The CSU, as it has ordinarily, put together a program. Sometimes we put together up to 6 programs, but we put together one primary program and participated in 3 or 4 others. This was the primary program, and it involved, well, actually 4 women from 4 different countries around the world, speaking about 4 different topics that are close to the heart of the CSU mission, meaning those things that relate closely to process and change in the physical environment, trying to break down silos and connect across those silos. So as you can see here, rather world famous Seth Lowe talked about public space, and she did so very beautifully. She talked about the role of public space as a support system for sustainability, something that I've been convinced about for very many years, ever since I read a nice paper by a colleague, Uka Kopor, on sustainability, which in the biggest scheme of things, she said, happened by people networking together, a very ethical opportunity for conversation. Chabi Lal came from Mumbai. She spoke about energy, and she shared the cross-cutting issues that we're all familiar with about the end of fossil fuels, the greening, and the process of convincing people how to manage it. Eleanor Mohammed, who's a leader in the Canadian planning world, and a member of the Habitat Professional Forum, which I'll speak about, spoke about mobility, and again, cross-cutting conversations about public and private, about fossil and electric, all of those things that are on the table. And finally, Mona Reddy, who is the chair of the Habitat Professional Forum, spoke about green buildings, and she had such a nice take on it, because what she spoke about were the global rating systems, LEED and other systems like it, and how they operate, and the ones that they are trying to incorporate into the world of Egypt at the moment. All of those were responded to by 2 CSU board members, Ted Liebman and Anna Rubo. So this was a pretty rich conversation. If we can move to the next slide, please. But this is the group. This is an on-site picture. We were joined in our session by Jose Luis Cortez, who's the president of UIA. I think more than one have mentioned that the networking aspect of the World Urban Forum is extraordinary. I myself debate, shall we spend the money to travel and use the fossil fuels to get there? But the fact of the matter is nothing competes with the networking, interchange, new friends, colleagues, and exchange of information that happens in an in-person event. So I'm quite pleased that this happened. I don't know how we will contend with it going forward. And I will also say, while this slide is here, and as I've said before, one of the great things about the World Urban Forum, I think I shared this with Mamunia Sharif this morning, is 17,000 people, closer to 11,000 in person, all with a very optimistic, positive attitude towards change, which I think we all know is absolutely necessary, especially in the time of great challenge that we have. That spiritual attitude, that psychological attitude, that professional attitude serves to increase and improve and augment good ideas being well implemented. Next slide, please, Nick. I participated in a few programs. There was the HPF rollout of its 2-year-long work on something called the HPF 2022 Roadmap to Recovery. This is something you're all going to become more familiar with, hopefully during the next year, since we will be rolling it out globally through various different organizations. This is what the HPF is currently working on, planning and strategizing about. The next slide, please. The Roadmap for Recovery. Next, please. Has 4 major areas, and under each of those 4 major areas, it has sub areas that look to various categories. And from my perspective and our contribution, those things that deal with change in the physical world, but in the overriding, the shared vision, the going local, the progress, and the capacity to action, these all work in support of the new urban agenda, in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think we have the next slide, please, which will give you a quick shot of the subcategories. And I don't think I want to go through these. I don't think there's time, but I encourage you to go online, Habitat Professional Forum, UN Habitat Professional Forum, Roadmap for Recovery, and you can get an early view of how these various sections will be rolled out. Next slide, Nick. And then I had in the closing session, a nice opportunity of sitting with the leaders of the World Urban Campaign, Christine Auclair and other colleagues, talking about transforming our cities, explaining how the Sustainable Development Goals and the new urban agenda intersect, and in current, as I think, I forget, it was maybe Anna who mentioned it, all rolled into the approach for the city we need now. I did some writing on that topic, transforming our cities in support of the World Urban Campaign initiative. So I think, you know, the WUF 11 had, oh my God, it had hundreds and hundreds of programs. And as you can see, those of us speaking today have spoken to a certain extent about the things we participated in, because those things we participated in kept us from going to the other hundreds of things that we might have liked to stop in to see. I also would underscore what Ted mentioned, that this was a wonderful, wonderful response to the tragedy of Ukraine next door that almost derailed the WUF 11. And instead of derailing it, the Habitat organization, UN Habitat, stepped up and built in so quickly the important speakers, the issues and the challenges happening in Ukraine, that it allowed us to focus on areas that are often subjugated by other areas. So I think the idea of disaster risk reduction, violence and conflict became writ large, and it's something that we all have to attend to as we move towards the WUF 12 in Egypt. And I think that's probably enough for me, and let's try and go to some Q&A. Thanks, Ted.
Okay, I'm not muted. What I'd like to do is, Anna, if you can do a 1 minute on the local project challenge, I would love you to do that, because that's one of the outcomes of the efforts after the SDGs were announced, that has just allowed people to understand what small things can happen worldwide that give us a new life of hope for our futures.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Lovely.
Good, excellent. Thanks, Ted. This was a project that we completed in 2019, or launched it at 29 at an Urban Thinkers campus. It's an online site with 111 projects from around the world, in categories that you can say here: civil society, education, and the professions. And what we did was to put out a call for projects that were considering the SDGs. And it's just a tremendously rich resource, I think, for learning about what's going on in different countries and who's doing it. And I could just give you a bit of I guess, a sort of a look at some of these. Here we have, you can scroll down and you can see all of these projects that are happening all over the world. One of the things that we did do, which I thought was really great, was to link with Ted's firm, Perkins Eastman, and to encourage take up of the SDGs through a project in their office with local students. Here, Student Visions for Guayaquil was the one that we did in Ecuador, and the other one is one in Mumbai, which is down here somewhere. But I think there's just a tremendously rich sort of resource here for learning about it. I can only urge you to take a good look and see what you can make of it. But this working in this way and building up a sort of knowledge sharing resource is also, I think, part of the sort of project that I talked about earlier, which is this working with the UIA and UN Habitat. And again, I was talking a little this morning about this project that we're now trying to do, which is to build on the local project challenge, but to go out into the education space and to try and sort of do a sort of parallel project along with the professional project that I was talking about. So if things go according to plan, we may be able to challenge schools around the world to do local projects. So we're talking about local action in which they will deal with communities, look at community connections, community engagement, and then feed it back. And hopefully it'll come back in something that visually looks like this. And our plan is to have these projects presented at the next 4 World Urban Forums, along with the required papers and academic sort of accompaniments that need to go with it, culminating, of course, in a book. So that was, I just want to share with you that project and would encourage you to take a look. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anna. When we talk about schools, we often talk about higher education. And I must say that at our meeting with the executive director of UN Habitat this morning, the thoughts became that maybe we have to go to from kindergarten up, where we really let the world understand the issues of the day. And the local project challenge for me, you hear about a toilet or a street crossing, and you find out the meaning that has for an entire community. And you say to yourself, what do I do about bikes in my city? Or what do I do? So it suggests it's an education in itself. And I have several questions which I can ask. We have not gotten any in the chat. So, but I think because I know all these people and I know some of the people online, if anyone out there or of the speakers wants to add anything or ask a question, I would love to hear from you.
Just apropos of your comment right now on the local project challenge, there is one fabulous project with children called All Matters Matter at PS 54. And that's a Brooklyn school, very low scoring school, but doing fabulous things in science education. And so they worked to develop an entry for the local project challenge. And if you go on that, you will see the innovations, these teachers who have been teaching things about sustainability, but there's particularly, they were studying bees. And these kids, instead of writing little essays, they did rap songs. So you can go on and have a look at their rap songs. And of course, it reverberates back into the school. So the kids were so delighted that they would be on a site having their songs will be on the site. So I think it's absolutely right to get to the children through some of this material and build in and link in with what's going on, and then to give them a platform for showing what's going on. So I think that has been one of the benefits of this local project challenge as well.
Thank you very much. On another thing that CSU and GUD, Global Urban Development, and the Consortium are doing together with UN Habitat this November is we're going to another kind of educational institution, the Cornell Tech on Roosevelt Island, which is almost a think tank incubator kind of education with brilliant people who are going to make new discoveries that will bring us out of hell in many areas. And so we're going to a different kind of education. And I think we all have to think about what education means in this complex multicultural world. And I guess I can ask if okay, I think Lance, shy as he is going to ask a question.
Actually, I'm not going to ask a question, Ted. You reminded me when you spoke about our November GUD program that the CSU has another program following from this. On the 5th of October, we have a program coming up, which is co-sponsored also by UN Habitat and the Turkish Women's League America, which will take place at the Turkish Center. And it's a program on women and sustainable urbanization with an extraordinary list of speakers, including Mamounia Modsharif, the UNED, and Chris Williams, the director of the New York office, a number of members of the consortium, the president of the Beverly Willis Architectural Foundation, Joan Blumenfeld, A.C. Younger. I would just, you might have gathered from my own introduction to the program that we did in Katowice. I am working hard to include women in our undertakings. That's why the panel that I convened consisted of 4 women, and they were 4 women of diverse backgrounds. I think it behooves us at this particular time in history to make sure that in that regard, we put our money where our mouth is. So I'm encouraging you all to look at this very well-organized program put together by Alia Chelek and Irena Zubčević, who is our executive administrator on the 5th of October. So that's a little CSU plug. I hope you don't mind the time taken.
Not at all. Open the floor.
Well, I can just jump in and add in terms of looking at from childhood to wherever, that the UN Decade on Healthy Aging reinforces the life course approach, that we should all know that how you operate yourself from 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 has an impact as you age. What you eat, the environment that you live in, the kind of views you have. And dealing with ageism, there are lots of tools that the World Health Organization has introduced for children as well as for adults dealing with the issues of ageism. So again, that's the approach we're all taking to say, again, that none of us can do it alone and that we're all aging from the time we're born.
Okay, if there are no hands raised, then I can ask.
Wait, Jeannie's got her hand raised, but I wanted to ask Jeannie before she asked her question about some of the work that she did when she went down to Colombia and the mayor in Colombia that I thought would be really interesting.
Lovely.
Sure. I think it was Kathy who mentioned the World Assembly that the UCLG is having in Dijon. And it's very interesting that the UCLG and the Global Task Force on Local and Regional Government has reached out to include stakeholders from different areas. And in the past two conferences that they've had, they've invited civil society groups to provide policy papers for discussion by these local leaders who are convening there, and there are thousands of them who come. At any rate, they have created 4 town hall sessions at their international conference, one on the commons, one on caring communities, one on climate change and culture, and one on trust in government. And GAP, along with 3 other groups, was charged with authoring the trust in government policy paper, which will be discussed there and then hopefully integrated into the work stream for UCLG. It was a very interesting process to develop this concept on what is trust in government in a time where we have so much distrust in government going around, and what one would suggest and have, and what kind of dialogue one would have. So we were invited, those who were heading these policy paper activities were invited to go to Bogota to join a Latin American focused conference that was going on, but also to assemble to discuss where we were. And as a result of being part of this Latin American conference, we were invited to go on some of the side events that they were doing, including meeting with and touring Bogota with the current mayor, Claudia Lopez, who was just unbelievably energetic and visionary. What they're dealing with there are a number of issues, affordable housing, mobility issues, and so forth. But what she has layered on to public policy in Bogota is thinking about how to develop the next layer of caring communities. As those of you who are dealing in the informal settlement area know that in Latin America, the informal settlements came early in the 1960s and 70s, and now they're quite consolidated. But they may be consolidated in the sense that the housing is permanent. It's no longer cardboard boards and tin roofs, but it's bricks and mortar and so forth. But there are lots of social services that are needed to bring people, particularly women, into the local economy in various ways. And so under Mayor Lopez, a number of programs have been created. In educational programs, daycare programs, health programs, and even programs for men to learn about how to be nice to women, not nice to women, how to understand some of the different roles that they could take within their households. And so we toured the area where this happened. And of course, like Medellin, Bogota has created a mobility system that is multimodal, a big BRT and transmillennial that was done under earlier administrations, plus this cable car, and then it'll join up into a regional metro system as well. So they've done a lot of investment in transportation. And interestingly enough, they've also been thinking about some of the cultural aspects of how to add pride to those residents of the informal settlements. So at the end of the cable car line going into this particular area is a museum on informality. And it was a really interesting facility because it celebrated the work that was done by the community members in developing that community. And the community members were very proud about taking us around and showing us these kinds of things, but also it really expresses the trials and tribulations of creating such communities and how they've been successful today. So as part of this policy paper development, we were happily invited to be part of this learning exercise of what's happening in Bogota.
Thank you.
So let me say to all of the people on this Zoom that when I think of why do I and why do we all go to the World Urban Forums? And we've heard all the rather famous, knowledgeable people that are speakers. I go also for listening. And listening, sometimes a hand is raised of someone who probably had special financing to get them there wherever we meet. And they'll raise their hand after hearing some speakers. And the words that come out of their mouth in their fourth, English being probably their fourth or fifth language, is remarkable. And I learn things that I can never learn anywhere else. And I will continue going as long as I can to the World Urban Forums and participate with some of the civil society and NGO groups, because I'm learning. And I encourage anyone listening, maybe for the first time to a Green Cities, to join us more and join to participate with us. If anyone, since we've reached our limit, if anyone wants to give a closing 30-second comment.
I just want to say this was really inspiring, and thank you all. It was, I hope there's a video of this and many more people see it.
I can give, I'll try and do 15 seconds, mostly for Kathy Klein. We went to a planning session held at the Polish Mission in New York last week that had much to do with planning for the WUF 12 in Egypt. The organizers from Katowice spent more time than I had heard before talking about their achievements in accessibility to the Katowice program. And as they spoke, I thought back and I said, there were so many things I hadn't realized when I was there, but there were few barriers. It was very open, a couple of glitches, but they said they were concerned about other able people. They were concerned about older people. And they really did. So there are things that happen at these events that don't actually rise to the surface of what we discuss, but in fact are incorporated on the ground in these locations. So I want to give credit to the WUF 11 for having done that, as well as they did with Ukraine. I'm looking forward to the theme that has not yet been defined for WUF 12. We discussed that this morning with the UN ED, and she said they're working on that theme, and as soon as it's released, I think we're waiting with bated breath to be able to respond to it with additional programming. Jeannie, thanks for telling us about your experience in South America. That was great.
Even at Habitat 1 in Vancouver in 1976, an innovation happened. We held that Habitat 1 on indigenous land.
Mm-hmm.
And it was held half outdoors, half indoors, in a sense, a bit primitive, but with each one and attending now the World Urban Forums, it's just a marvelous experience. I encourage everyone to come with us.
Just as an addendum, Ted, that Habitat Forum, Stakeholder Forum, was the first sanctioned stakeholder forum associated with either the climate conference or the Habitat conferences. It was sanctioned by the UN. The other ones were not.
So I'm going to wish everyone a good weekend. Stay safe and well. And my best wishes to you all. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Ted.